So let's go ahead and talk about variable distance buffers. So with a variable distance buffer, what we can do is we can say for each feature, use a different distance, right? So a variable distance buffer, right, allows each feature right, to have a different buffer distance or a different user right, have a different user defined distance. Right, so a variable distance buffer, or changing up the buffer parameters to include variable distance, allows each feature to have a different user-defined distance. So let's go ahead and look at what that looks like in terms of our farming example. So we have the exact same 5 irrigation systems, right? So this is the same 5 irrigation systems. Right, but now we're modeling this slightly more realistically by saying, okay, right, each of these different systems is a different model. So each model would have a different distance that it's rated to irrigate. Right, so in this case, we have 3 models. Type 1, we have 3 different models. We have type 1, we have type 2, and we have type 3. And each one of them has a different distance. So now what will happen when we, as acting as the computer, go to execute this buffer is we're going to go and look at the distances and say, okay, well, we have a different distance for each feature, or different distances for different features. So if we, as the computer, were to execute this, we would go, we're at feature A, we would look and say, okay, A is type 1 and has a distance of 75 feet. So when we do the buffer, right, we would draw this out, right, as 75 feet, and we would execute the buffer like that. We would move to B, and right before we would say, oh, everything is 75, we only specified one distance. But with a variable distance buffer, what we do is we say, okay, B, right, this is a different model, it has a different distance. Now I'm going to do that in a different color here just to illustrate, right? So with B, instead of going 75 feet, right, we would go 100 feet and create our buffer that way. And we would do the exact same thing with C, right? Look again, right? We're looking at feature C. C is a type 2 with a distance of 100 feet. So we would do that again, right? We would go out 100 feet. And we would make our buffer like that. D, we would look and see that it is a type 1, meaning it's only going to be 75. Finish our buffer. And then E, right, we would notice is actually a type 3. Type 3 with 125 feet. So E would actually be the largest. Right, and so with variable distance, the end result is that we can generate different distances for different features based on an attribute in the attribute table. Right, so in this case, right, the attribute distance has different values for different features. And so if we look at that sort of done properly to scale, right, is you can see that we have E, B, and C are bigger than A and D because they have a bigger distance. And you'll also notice that in this case, right, the areas are now bigger. Right, this was the area that we had originally assumed all of them to be. But now, because right, we're taking into account the fact that the different irrigation systems have different outputs, right, we start to get bigger areas for better models. Now, so this solved the issue of having right different distances for different points. but we still have, right, overlapping area. So in the next step, right, we'll talk about how, if we wanted to, we could deal with having overlapping areas like that.